What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtnett. In today's episode, I'm going to be previewing the Week 10 action. We've got one huge game in the Big Ten Conference. Outside of that, there's an intriguing game in the ACC, another one that's a big upset watch in the Big Ten, a couple other games I'm going to take a look at, but it's the big one happening in State College, Pennsylvania. I'm going to go over that one first, but before I do, if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I upload. First things first in this week's action is, of course, number 4 Ohio State at number 3 Penn State. This game is for Big Ten second place right now. I mean, Oregon right now has a pretty firm lead at the top of the Big Ten standings. They've got a game I'll talk about here in a little bit. But this game is massive for both of these two teams, and it's a big game for both of the head coaches, for Ryan Day and for James Franklin. With the Buckeyes, Ryan Day is, I think, 2-7 against top 5 opponents, and James Franklin, I think, is 1-13, and he also has the similar record against these Buckeyes with just one win during his tenure with the Nittany Lions. So both coaches are going to be looking to try to break the mold. Something interesting to watch in this game, will Drew Aller be starting at quarterback for the Nittany Lions? It's right now being called a game-time decision, but his backup has stepped up in big moments already this season. Or maybe not big moments, but he stepped up at times this season for the Nittany Lions. So it'll definitely be interesting to see who James Franklin goes with at quarterback. Aller, while playing, though, has thrown for 1,640 yards, 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. I think either way, this team might lean a little bit more on running backs Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton. Both of those guys are really good running backs and should be important options. Penn State defensively runs a bit more of a man defense under defense coordinator Tom Allen, who obviously came over from Indiana, while Ohio State has the number 4 stop rate nationally, which means they're doing a really good job at stopping teams from scoring touchdowns or maybe even scoring at all, ranking 4th in that metric. A question for Ohio State to answer is, how are they going to do in the ground game? We know that Penn State's going to have a good rushing attack in this one, but Ohio State has struggled, especially since the injury to Josh Simmons, their left tackle, against Oregon. They've dealt with some other offensive linemen, both issues and injuries. So will they be able to get Quinshaw Judkins and Travion Henderson going? That's going to be a big question. And they're going against a run defense that ranks 8th nationally and 2nd in the Big Ten. Interestingly enough, though, Ohio State, it's kind of strength against strength here. Ohio State's rush defense is the best in the Big Ten, ranking 6th nationally. So that's going to be a key area to watch in the trenches at the line of scrimmage and kind of that second level especially. I think we know, though, that that's where things are going to get interesting because both of these teams have a pair of really good running backs, and both defenses have a really good ability to stop the run. So, because of that, another interesting thing to watch is the Buckeye wide receivers against the secondary. It's going to be Jeremiah Smith against A.J. Harris or Jalen Kimber, Emeka Ibuka against either Kimber or Elliott Washington, any combination of those guys. I think Harris is more of Penn State's CB1, so he'll probably be on Smith more in this one, but Ohio State definitely runs Ibuka as that number 1 receiver sometimes as well. So something interesting to watch is, will G. Scott step up? If those receivers are covered by two of the top cornerbacks in the Big Ten Conference, how will a player like a G. Scott step up, or maybe even Henderson or Judkins in the passing game? Another big question for the Buckeyes, Will Howard's decision-making late. We saw late in that previous road game against the top 5 opponent when they went to Eugene against the Ducks. Late, poor decision, slid just a second too late, although he was watching the clock there. But that'll be important. And then also Ryan Day's play calls late. I'm sure, and in fact, actually, I'm almost certain that Chip Kelly is doing more of the play calls, but maybe just from a schematics, game management, all that sort of stuff. Something that Ryan Day has struggled with. I mean, in these big games, he has not been successful. As I mentioned already, he's 2-6 or 2-7. I've seen both, but either way, he has not been very successful. I think that's going to be important here. I think James Franklin also mentioned that he's trying to get the monkey off his back. He's 1-9 against the Buckeyes in his coaching career. I'm going to go with it. I'm going to go with my gut. I think the way the Buckeyes played against Nebraska left a lot to be desired. I think Penn State is playing well. I think, both of these teams were looking ahead to the next week. Last week, Penn State did a better job of kind of snapping out of that and played a really good second half at Wisconsin. I think that carries over into this game. And I'm going to go with Penn State 34, Ohio State 30. After this, Ohio State's going to be kind of playing, win out. You're going to have to probably win out. I think the only other game they can maybe afford to lose is at Indiana, but even that is kind of dangerous territory. So Buckeyes are certainly not done after this one. I think they still stay kind of among the top in college football, but this would be a huge win for the Nittany Lions. It would probably all but seal their spot in the Big Ten championship game, most likely against Oregon. And speaking of those Ducks, they're number 1 in the country. They took care of business against Illinois last week, and they're going up against a team that's already in win-or-go-home mode against the Michigan Wolverines. The Wolverines are 5-3. They got a big confidence booster by beating Little Brother last week in Michigan State. It wasn't a pretty win, but it was a win nonetheless. These Wolverines are in prime opportunity for a trap game in terms of Oregon's perspective. You've got a team that is fighting to keep their season alive, coming off of a big emotional win over their in-state rivals. And so this is a big game for Michigan. They had a forced fumble versus Michigan State. They haven't been as big on creating turnovers this year. Another big thing to watch will be Colson Loveland. He really had a big game against the Spartans and a nice quote post game. However, I think Oregon is too much in this one. They've been a good road team this year. They haven't exactly played like the best opposition on the road. They've played mostly inferior opponents, but they've won each of those road games by 35, 21, and 35. So I think Oregon gets the job done and pretty much puts the nail in the coffin of Michigan's season with a 31-21 win. Now looking at an intriguing game in the ACC, you've got number 18 Pitt at number 20 SMU. The Mustangs' only loss is to BYU. It was an 18-15 loss at home. They're hosting the Panthers this week. Panthers, both of these teams actually have 2 of the top 4 scoring offenses in the ACC. SMU has the number 5 total offense. Pittsburgh is number 5 in passing offense. And both of these teams rank in the top 5 in the ACC in a couple of key defensive metrics as well. SMU has the number 4 defense overall in the ACC, and Pitt is 5th in sacks. So these teams have been, they're right there behind Clemson and Miami, I think. The winner of this game will put themselves on a little bit more level footing, but I think they are still behind those 2 teams. But this game is important. Pittsburgh, you've got the Alabama transfer Eli Holstein, who's thrown for 1,800 yards, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, and he's going up against a total dual-threat quarterback for SMU in Kevin Jennings, who has accumulated just short of 2,000 total yards and 13 touchdowns. And the Mustangs also have a really good running back in Brashard Smith, just a tick under 750 yards and 9 touchdowns. Like I said, the winner of this game kind of gets pole position behind the top 2 dogs in the ACC this year. Pitt also will host Clemson on November 16th. So honestly, I think a win here for Pitt is big. I think it might be a little bit bigger for SMU just because if they win this game, they're likely going to be able, I think, to finish ACC play undefeated. So, you're going to have Clemson and Miami don't meet in the regular season either. So it's possible we get 3 undefeated ACC teams when all is said and done. I'll have to double check that, but Clemson and Miami obviously both undefeated in ACC play. They don't play each other. So if SMU wins this game, we could be looking at 3 undefeated ACC teams at the end of the season. I'll have to double check that, but I think that is a legitimate possibility. So that's really interesting. When looking at this game, I think this matchup does just slightly favor Pitt. However, I do think home field advantage can be the great equalizer in college football at times, and I think SMU is able to get the win because they're playing at home. I'm going to go SMU 27, Pitt 24. Then looking at two other ACC games, both Clemson and Miami have interesting games this week. Miami hosts 6-2 Duke. I think they are able to get a pretty comfortable win. Duke played SMU, took them to overtime last week, but I think Miami 38, Duke 21. Clemson gets Louisville, who pushed Miami last week to the brink. That one, however, was in Louisville. It was a 52-45 win for the Hurricanes last week. I think Clemson gets a pretty comfortable win here, 45-24. Their offense has looked really good. I've mentioned this a lot on the channel ever since that game against Georgia. And they would then be 2 weeks out from a big game against Pitt. Regardless of if Pitt wins or loses this weekend, that game November 16th will be important. So that's kind of the outlook here. One other thing, an upset outlook for this week is Texas A&M going into South Carolina, coming off the big win, obviously last week at home over LSU. This is like Oregon, kind of a trap game. Picked up a ranked win last week. You're going into an environment that seemed to stump LSU at times and Alabama. Both of those teams just escaped with narrow wins at Williams-Brice Stadium. So I think it is an upset watch for the Aggies. I just think South Carolina's proven it. They don't quite have what it takes to actually pull that upset, and I think that happens again this week. I think the Aggies do win. I think it is close again, but I think South Carolina just misses out again on a marquee upset. But that's my outlook for Week 10. Again, a little bit outside of that big game in Happy Valley, a little bit of a downer of a week, but I'm really looking forward after this week. I'll be going over my playoff outlook. I'll obviously break down Ohio State, Penn State, kind of lead my next video, but I'm going to really be going over the teams that I think are in real contention for the college football playoff, kind of inspired by Joel Klatt's latest video. I love to kind of model my channel after his, do my best to not just copy what he does, but I definitely like to model it because he does a really good job and is probably one of, if not the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to talking college football. So that's all for this video. I'm really looking forward to breaking down that CFP outlook ahead of the first rankings next Tuesday. But that's all for this episode of College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.